This is the blessing to the tribe of Judah. We have the blessings from Jacob to his sons in this week's Parashat. Osri legefen iro. He ties to the vine his donkey. Ulesoreka b'nei asono. And to the branch his she-donkey, the foal. Kibes b'yayin levusho. He watches in wine his clothing, which means he has a lot of wine. B'dam anovim suso, and his robe in the blood of grapes. Just tell you how much wine he has, how much grapes he has. Okay, page 545. Hachlili einayim miyoyin. He's red-eyed from wine. Uleven shinayim mecholov. And his milk teeth from milk. So the rabbis read the sentence like this. Uleven shinayim mecholov. His love on shinayim, instead of his milk teeth, the white of his teeth is better than milk. Meaning if you give a person a smile, that's better than giving him milk. That's the way the Talmud reads the sentence. Uleven shinayim mecholov. It's Godo Hamalbin Shenov to somebody. Give somebody a smile is greater than giving him milk. So my question is, that's a very nice message to everybody. A smile is very important to give a person. What does that have to do with the blessing of Judah? That's a blessing, a lesson for all the tribes. What does that have to do with the tribe of Judah? Specifically, Leben Shinayim Mecholov. That it's greater to give a person a smile than to feed him milk. That's a very important message, and a message we should keep up, but it doesn't have much of a particular relevance. It's a moral message, but it doesn't have anything to do with the tribe of Judah. Got the question, Doc? So I'd like to suggest like this, a very fascinating thing. There's a Gemara that sounds like something out of 1984. Or out of Animal Farm, I should say. Gemara says like this. I never saw a deer that was a farmer. I never met a deer that was a farmer. I never met a fox who was a storekeeper. And I never met a lion who was a porter. I never met the three of them. And all of them have parnasa from God, and they're only created to serve me, so for shiurim, that God will take care of me. I just said over at Talmud on the last page in the Tractate of Kiddushin. Shimon ben Elazar says an animal with a lot of energy should be a farmer. An animal which is shrewd would be a fox. An animal which is strong would be a porter. The only question is, the king of all the animals is the lion. So why would a lion want to be a porter, be a bellhop? Why would a lion want to be a bellhop? I never met a bellhop. I never met a lion who was the king, and he has parnasa. His country's doing well, and there's a very fascinating message here. The idea of being a bellhop is you give somebody a feeling you're carrying their clothes, carrying their suitcases. That's an indication of their importance. In fact, all through Tanakh, kings always had nosei kelov. A king had someone carrying his armor. That's what a king had. When somebody goes to the airport, instead of slipping 3 suitcases, he has a bellhop carrying all his bags. Gives him a feeling of importance. The message of Judah, the tribe of Judah, is king. King is not to get honor from the people, but a king is in order to empower the people. That's the function of a king. His function is to empower people. George, come late, that's the punishment, George.
There's no punishment to be here.
So the function of a king is... The function of a king is to empower his people. It's such an unbelievable message in the home also. Most of us, as the head of our home, feel that we tell our children, why should I do this, Pop? Because I said so. And the truth of the matter is exactly the opposite. The goal of a father is to empower his children, to make them feel good about themselves, to constantly make them feel good about themselves. In fact, there's a fascinating story with Rabbi Packhouse that Yitzi heard the story from the Almana. This is a beautiful story. One day he calls up his wife. He was coming in from out of town. I'm staying in a hotel tonight. We're staying in a hotel. We got a whole empty house here. What's the problem? I mean, the kids are there. He said, because I was fundraising, and the fundraising didn't go as good as I hoped it would go, and I'm really not in a great mood, and I don't want to come home and give the kids a feeling that I'm short shrift, I'm not respectful of them, I'm just aggravated, because to your children, you have to give them a good feeling that you're there for them when a child comes home from school and the mother is, I had a terrible day, or the father comes home from the office, tells his wife he had a terrible day. He's actually diminishing her feeling of comfort zone, because he's putting his problems in the front, and she doesn't feel comfortable. This is her safe zone, and that's what happened. He came home. By the time he came home, he had slept it off already, and he was his friendly self, his jolly self. The kids felt good. He gave kids smiles. That's the job of a father. That's the job of a father. It's an unbelievable responsibility a person has in his own home to make everybody else feel comfortable in the house. It's not that you have to feel comfortable. In your own home, you're sort of a guest. Your job is to keep everybody else in the house happy. There's a very interesting Gemara that the Kohen Gadol makes noise on Yom Kippur. His clothing make noise. And the Gemara says, it's an example, before you go into your house, this is what Rabbi Yochanan says, Rashi brings this in the Gemara, is you should knock on the door. I understand in the Beis Hamikdash is God's house, so I have to knock on the door. But what do I have to knock on the door in my house for? That's exactly the point. Your house your job is to make everybody else feel comfortable. Just to come in there and assert yourself and put yourself, you're displacing in your home. The ones who have to feel comfortable in the home is the children. And if you come home and you come in without knocking on the door, you're invading their privacy. The idea is to make them feel safe in the house. And that's what the Beis Hamikdash is also. It's not God's house, it's our house. It's the house that God told us to build for ourselves, and that's the language of the Rambam, that we're supposed to build a house for ourselves. And nevertheless, the Kohen Gadol has to go there and not impose and make everybody, the other Kohanim, feel comfortable in the house. That's the idea of what our responsibility as parents is, to give everybody else their place. Instead of figuring out that I have to have a place, I have to give everybody else their space. That's what a king does. A king gives space. A king is a public servant. In the secular world, the people serve the king. In the Jewish world, the king serves the people. In fact, it's a whole different philosophy of life. And it's really the a priori axiom of the Torah. Avram Avinu is told by God, I want you to leave your house, your father's house, where you're born, and I promise you I'll give you fame, fortune, and a big family. And this was the first test of Abraham. And the question that everybody asked, what kind of test is this? Abraham is being promised fortune. People move from one place to another place on a better business opportunity. You can't have any children here. People uproot themselves and go to a doctor who maybe will be able to help your wife get pregnant. I mean, so what kind of test is this? So the way I understand it is, that's the first test of Abraham, to actually believe that God is interested in him. God's interested in man. A king is God's representative in the world. Just like God is committed to human beings, God is committed to the people. God wants to make us feel comfortable in our place. And everything he does is for our sake. He does for our sake, not for his sake. In the Rashi points out that in idolatry, it's exactly the opposite. They come in, they pray to the icon, and not only does the icon not answer the prayers, the icon responds as, I never saw you before in my life. As like, I never saw you before. Why should people, it always bother me, why should people serve a God who doesn't recognize them? You know, you've been bringing sacrifice and everything, and he pretends he doesn't recognize. So what's the idea of sacrifice? Well, this is the great American dream. I regret, but I have one life to give for my country. When you give yourself over to something greater than you, you get absorbed in the reality of the idol, of the icon, of the God. And that's what the secular world thinks service of God is, to get absorbed in his reality, and that elevates you by being absorbed in his reality. By Judaism, it's not that way at all. It's not to be absorbed in his reality. It's to understand that everything he does is to give you a feeling of reality. It's a huge, huge difference. I mean, it's literally the difference between the secular world and the Jewish world. That it's not to give reality to God. God's purpose or God's role in the world was to give reality to man. Wherever you see his tremendous greatness, you see his modesty. Modesty was to empower man. The Gemara says, "Kol makom shatom motzi God luso." Wherever you see the greatness of God, shamatom motzi am v'sinuso. You see his modesty. Modesty is empowering other people, and in your own home, you have to be modest. You have to want to empower your children. And most of us seriously don't do this. It's not about serving God. It's not about serving religion. It's about empowering the children. You know, it's telling children, you have to go to shul with me. That's the wrong message. They don't have to do anything. It's not about them. It's about, I'm going, you want to come? Fine, I'd love to walk together with you. You know, I enjoy walking with you. I can talk to you in the way, but not to tell your kids to come to shul. Don't put any pressure on them at all. Don't worry. They'll at some point in life they'll find out that going to shul is important, davening is important. But if you want them to daven and to feel good about what they're doing, you have to give them the feeling of it's all for their sake. It's not for God's sake. It's for their sake. That's the fundamental principle of Judaism. Everything is for the sake of man. God does everything for the sake of man, and that was the first test to Abraham. And that's an unbelievable test. I mean, people were doing human sacrifice for 2,000 years, and that means that they sacrificing their children to a deity. That's giving everything to the deity. And now God is telling him the opposite. It's all for your sake. And he had to believe that was all for his sake. And even by the Akedah, it was clear from the beginning that in the test of Abraham slaughtering his son, from the beginning, Rashi says he was told that he doesn't have to slaughter him. He just has to bring him up on the altar, but not to kill him. Okay, what the test is, when we get to that parsha, we'll discuss it. But from the beginning, he knew from the beginning that he didn't have to slaughter his son. It was only in order to get him there and to wave the knife in front of him, and in his mind he should have the feeling that he's giving a gift to God, but it's all about for the sake of God. For the sake of man, not for the sake of God. There's nothing in Judaism that's for God's sake. It's all for the sake of man.
Rav Yochanan used to knock on the door of his own home to enter it.
Yeah. You come in place, you startle people. They feel comfortable, and all of a sudden they're getting startled. And of course, I say there's deeper ramifications. What about if you come in upset? Where's my mint julep? Honey, make me a drink. I need to go to my room for a while.
So it seems so divorced from real life. I'm still grappling with it. So the reality is that if you create an environment for your children where everything is about them, the chances of them growing up and functioning in a normal world are nil. Because everything isn't about them, everything is about them and others, including respect for their parents. And it's a...
Let me answer that, what you're asking. It's not true. When a person knows who they are and they feel comfortable in their shoes, they can get along with everybody. The only reason I have friction with people, or anybody has any friction with people, is because he's not sure who he is, and maybe the other person is invading his space. You're diminishing my space. But if I know who I am, you're not diminishing my space, and therefore I'm very comfortable with myself. Nobody's diminishing my space, and somebody's trying to. Okay, he needs that. I'm happy to give him his space. The way Rashi defines a modest person means he backs out of the space. Somebody comes into his space, he withdraws from the space. So you need this space? Fine. It doesn't affect me. I don't want to give you so much. In fact, most of us, the problem, what we deal with people, we don't get along with them, is we give them too much free parking. We allow them free parking in our heads, that they're allowed to affect us. It's not good to allow people to affect you. Whatever they do, okay, they did, so they don't understand better. It doesn't affect me. If I know who I am, let me tell you what Rashi says in the Gemara. The Gemara says like this: a person who is does not have derech eretz is eina min hayishuv. He's not a member of society. If you don't have any respect for people, you're not a member of society. The Gemara says uposel la'edus, and he is not good to be a witness. What does it do with not good to be a witness? So Rashi explains like this: the only reason a witness, in order to testify, has to be credible. You have to think he's telling the truth. So Rashi says like this: a person who doesn't have any derech eretz, that means he doesn't get along with people, then he has no reason to tell the truth. He has no reason to tell the truth. He doesn't care what you think about him. He has no reason to tell the truth. If he doesn't have any derech eretz. If I respect you, so then I have derech eretz. So therefore I want that you should think good of me too. And how do you think good of me? Is I wouldn't tell a lie. So I wouldn't tell a lie. Therefore, and I don't have the reputation of being a liar. Therefore, I am a credible witness. But if I don't care about what you think of me, so why shouldn't I lie? So you call me a liar. So what? Doesn't make a difference. That's what Rashi says. And Rashi says because he doesn't know who he is. Right on the Talmud. He doesn't know who he is. If you know who you are, you'll always have tremendous derech eretz. Somebody who knows who they are has tremendous respect for other people.
Well, that presumes,
that's the
of
real
course,
world.
that we're all perfect, that we all know who we are, and many of us don't know. We spend our whole life trying to find out.
But it's our job as parents to make sure the children know who they are. That's exactly the point. We have to, as parents, we have to give our children the knowledge that we respect who they are. It's mostly a question of focus. It's not a question that we have to be the greatest psychologist in the world. And it's that if you look at a person and you're interested in figuring out who he is, what his talents are, what his abilities are, you'll find out. You know your children better than anybody else. So if you know this child is good in math, you tell him, let him know you have very excellent math skills. The other one's good in history. The other one sings well. And each one, as they get aware and comfortable with who they are, they get along with all their siblings too. But you know what? The real problem is we as parents have dreams and aspirations for our kids. We don't want kids to be who they are. We want them to be who we want them to be. This one has to be a scholar, and this one has to be a great tennis player, and this one has to be a great swimmer, and this one has to be a great mathematician. That's what I want from them. That's not who they are. But if you let them know who they are, they're comfortable with themselves, and they'll do wonderfully in the world.
Rabbi, you said that one who knows who he is has derech eretz.
Yeah.
You said one who knows who he is has derech eretz.
One who knows who he is.
Has derech eretz.
Derech eretz means knowing who.
Yeah. So, and it's the parents or father or both to show the child who he is.
The parents gave him the feeling of who he was, right?
Can the school have any impact on that?
Well, teachers have exactly the same responsibility. Teacher's a parent, 100%.
Okay.
The teacher's a parent. The teacher has to look at his
Can I
children.
quote you on that?
What?
Can I quote you on that?
100%.
Thank you.
You have it on video.
Yeah, everyone.
But it's something like that with this week's, they send out a weekly shiur. And one of the things we were critical of was competitive sports
Right.
in school, because there the idea is to win over somebody else. And that you didn't think it was, but the only thing that you're probably wrong about is definitely the children should play tennis, because Jan would, my wife would be very upset by your reference to that, but otherwise.
But again, it's not about competing with somebody else, but doing the best job you can do yourself, that's all. Do the best you can. You compete against yourself, you don't compete against anybody else.
You even criticize the Mishnayos contest. Who can
That's
memorize? It's not just sports. The idea of what you're capable of.
Right. Yeah, we actually cut out in the school. Most schools have competitive, competition in learning, and I cut it out because it's a huge. One boy can memorize in an hour X, and one boy can memorize in an hour 10X. So the boy who gets X and the other one gets 5X, he's going to lose if he only gets 1X. And even though the boy who got 5X could have done 10, and it should be exactly the opposite. And every year, you can do this in a smaller school like we have, is that the teachers let the talk to the teachers the next year and try and give the understanding of what the potential is. And students are graded on tests according to their potential. In our elementary school, someone is graded according to his potential. In other words, somebody gets a 50% if that's his potential. Or people can be fallible, but if they estimate that he has a 50% ability and that's an A for him, he gets an A. If they feel somebody should have gotten a 90% and gets 80%, he gets a B. It's a very healthy thing. And
That's how phys ed teachers.
What?
grade. Back in the day, the phys ed teachers would grade that way.
Not mine, I kept
Phys ed.
failing.
If you had limited athletic ability, but you did well for that ability, you got an A.
And you got
But if
to.
you were a great star and you didn't do that well, you got a C.
That's the truth in life. If you do the best you can, I feel good. I mean, in God world, I'm doing the best I can. What is God gave me this potential? That's what He wants me to do, and I feel very comfortable with myself. I'm not competing with anybody. The only thing we learn to learn from other people is to understand that somebody's trying harder than me. That's already something that I can use. That is in Kina So from Tar B'Chochma. My rivalry is from somebody else, is to understand he's trying harder than me. Well, if he's trying 80% and I'm trying 30%, then I should use that as a incentive to get me to try harder. It's just a whole different focus on what our homes are. That's the main thing. And all you have to do is be interested in your children. You'll see what they are. You see them every day. You know, a lot of times they come and tell you or your wife things about themselves. The children want the parents to know who they are and what issues they're going through. And therefore, the children are known by the parents. They're known, and you have to guide them accordingly. Rabbi Akiva spends a huge amount of time. He's the mashgiach in the yeshiva, the spiritual mentor. A huge amount of time working with every boy on his potential, and he gives him goals that the boy has to figure. Can you think you can reach this? Okay, you can reach this. That's all you're being graded on. You're reaching what you think you can do, and that gives somebody. He'll get a grade. He'll get a BTL from the yeshiva, and he'll be able to go into any college, graduate school, because he has the degree. And the grade that we give him is based on his own belief in what he can do. Of course, he spends time with them, giving him an understanding of their potential. Because unfortunately, a lot of people come from homes where they don't get that at home. That's a big problem. The home didn't give them feeling what they are, what they should have been.
Don't you think that there is an issue, though, that, and I understand what you're saying, there are multiple truths in life, unfortunately, not just one truth. On the other hand, you have to balance that by having a child acknowledge that the reality outside is that it is a competitive world. And while he may be really fulfilling his potential, for example, in the yeshiva and get his A's, when he goes out into the world, he won't be measured necessarily by that. He'll be measured against his contemporaries in whatever field he does. And under those circumstances, he has to learn that there is more than that, that obviously it's important to have his fulfill his potential, but equally that there is a hierarchy out there, and some people are number one and some are number 4.
But it doesn't make a difference to him. As long as he's doing what he can do, he feels good. It doesn't make a difference. What?
He has to feel good.
That's all. He feels good. And by the way, who's going to do better salesman? The guy who is high-powered, or the guy who's feels good about himself? Who's going to be a better salesman? He doesn't have any pressure. I got to come up. I got to make money. You know, when somebody comes in, I got to make money. I need it. You know, I'm not going to make this deal because I want revenue, and I'm competing to be the biggest earner in the company this month. Or somebody who comes in, I feel comfortable. Who's going to be a better salesman? More relaxed is going to be a better salesman.
I would answer that if someone knows who he is, then he will know, for example, like the gentleman said, it's a competitive world out there. He will know what field or where it is that he should be, what he should be doing, and what he should do to get the most out of his ability.
That's right.
That's all that you can expect of a person.
Right, but I'm saying, but even if he's in the field of trying to
Well,
sales,
that's a good answer, but that's
even if he's in sales, the best salesman is somebody who feels comfortable, not the guy who has to make a deal.
My daughter called me and said that her 11-year-old son and her husband were having difficulty because her husband was saying, you're 11 years old, you're getting close to bar mitzvah, you got to come to shul with me, and I need you to come to shul. And the more he said it, the son said, I don't want to go to shul. So my daughter, whose father is a student of the Rosh Yeshiva, has heard the Rosh Yeshivas for 40 years, said, can I suggest something? He said, sure. She said, instead of saying you have to and I want, why don't you say to him, I would love to go to shul with you and walk with you to shul and talk, but if you prefer to daven at home, that's fine. It's your decision. He said that a few minutes later, he said, I think I want to go to shul with you. And every week that he goes to shul, no argument.
That's classic.
It works, Rick.
I listened and she listened.
And I just brought from the can.
Rick, just one point. See, you by that set the example to her, and she set the example, which was the whole point. You set the example to your children, and they absorb it in one form or another. It may not happen immediately, but it may happen the second or third time. You set the example, which is what the Rosh Yeshiva always said. Your kids know you better than anybody. And they watch you 24/7. That's their job. So they learn from what you do and how you react to them.
I just want to end with one thing. Nobody should feel bad that they haven't done this for the last 40 years. Because the truth of the matter is, every child his whole life wants approval from his parents. So it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start. They didn't get it, but they want approval. And if, God forbid, a parent dies before ever came, child is devastated by that.
Yeah.
So as long as you're here, you'll be able to immediately change, and the children will be very happy to get approval. Everybody have a great Shabbos.